The Caribbean is entering its most dangerous moment in decades. Rising U.S. military activity, new sanctions, and growing speculation about intervention have raised a critical question. Could Cuba become Washington's next geopolitical flashpoint? For decades, Cuba has existed under American sanctions and political isolation. But in 2026, tensions between Washington and Havana have surged to levels not seen in years. A series of developments has fueled speculation about a possible confrontation. The Trump administration has intensified pressure on Cuba through new sanctions and increasingly aggressive rhetoric. Military activity across the Caribbean has expanded. American naval assets have become more visible in the region. At the same time, discussions within policy circles and media outlets have increasingly focused on whether Washington could eventually consider military options. Officially, the White House rejects suggestions of an invasion. However, history shows that major geopolitical crises often begin long before the first shot is fired. They begin with pressure. They begin with military deployments. And they begin with a belief that political change can be forced from the outside. The question now being asked is simple. If tensions continue to rise, what options are actually available to Washington? The current crisis did not emerge overnight. In January 2026, the Trump administration signed an executive order identifying Cuba's policies as a threat to American national security. Meanwhile, Cuba remains designated as a state sponsor of terrorism, a classification that severely limits foreign investment and financial access. Across the Caribbean, military activity has increased. U.S. Southern Command continues regional operations involving warships, surveillance aircraft, and special operations forces. The American military base at Guantanamo Bay remains one of Washington's most important assets in the region. Thousands of U.S. military personnel are currently operating throughout the Caribbean basin. From Washington's perspective, the infrastructure required for rapid escalation already exists. But Cuba is not without capabilities of its own. Cuba's military is far smaller than that of the United States. The country maintains roughly 50,000 active military personnel. It also possesses tanks, artillery systems, air defense units, naval forces, and combat aircraft. Yet Cuba's real defense strategy is not based on matching American military power. Instead, it relies on a doctrine known as the War of the Entire People. The concept was developed during the Cold War and remains central to Cuban defense planning. Under this doctrine, the entire society becomes part of national defense. Civilian infrastructure, local communities, and reserve forces all contribute to resistance efforts. The goal is simple. If an invasion occurs, the conflict becomes long, costly, and politically painful for the attacker. This strategy acknowledges military weakness while attempting to maximize the costs of occupation. The first possible option is a limited military operation. Rather than launching a full-scale war, Washington could attempt a targeted strike against key military and political targets. Cruise missiles could hit command centers. Drones could target communications networks. Special operations forces could conduct precision raids against specific objectives. The attraction of this approach is obvious. It requires relatively few troops. It limits American casualties. and it offers the possibility of achieving strategic objectives quickly. However, limited strikes carry significant risks. Cuba could retaliate against Guantanamo Bay. Military escalation could rapidly spiral beyond initial expectations. International criticism would likely be severe. Most importantly, targeted operations do not always remain limited. History is filled with examples of small interventions that evolved into larger conflicts. The second option is a large-scale air campaign. This would resemble previous American military operations designed to destroy an opponent's military infrastructure without immediately deploying large ground forces. The first targets would likely include radar systems, air defense sites, military headquarters, and airfields. Stealth aircraft, strategic bombers, carrier-based fighters, cruise missiles, and electronic warfare systems would all play major roles. The objective would be complete control of Cuban airspace. Once air superiority is achieved, military infrastructure could be systematically degraded. Could Cuba resist? To some extent, yes. The country still operates air defense systems originally supplied by the Soviet Union. Portable missile systems could threaten low-flying aircraft. However, most analysts believe Cuba would struggle to withstand a sustained American air campaign. The greater challenge for Washington would be political. A bombing campaign would attract worldwide attention. Images of destruction would dominate international media. Diplomatic pressure against the United States would intensify almost immediately. The third option may be the most realistic. Instead of direct military action, Washington could intensify economic and maritime pressure. The objective would be to squeeze Cuba's economy without firing a shot. Fuel shipments could face additional restrictions. Maritime monitoring could increase. Financial pressure could become even more severe. This approach offers several advantages. It avoids military casualties. It reduces escalation risks. And it allows Washington to maintain pressure over an extended period. But there is one major obstacle. Cuba has spent decades adapting to sanctions. Economic hardship is not a new experience for the island. There is no guarantee that increased pressure would trigger political change. Washington could invest years in a strategy that ultimately fails to produce its desired outcome. Not every confrontation follows a predictable path. One possibility is a humanitarian intervention. If a major humanitarian crisis emerged, international pressure for action could grow. In theory, foreign forces could enter Cuba under the banner of civilian protection and humanitarian assistance. But such missions are often far more complicated than they initially appear. If resistance develops, humanitarian deployments can evolve into military occupations. Another wild card is the reaction of ordinary Cubans. If the population rallies behind the government during a crisis, external pressure could produce the opposite of its intended effect. Instead of weakening political unity, it could strengthen it. The international response could become one of the most important factors in any crisis. Russia and China would closely monitor developments. Both powers have strategic interests in limiting American influence and demonstrating support for partners facing U.S. pressure. Across Latin America, public opinion could also become a significant factor. Many governments in the region remain deeply sensitive to foreign intervention. A military operation against Cuba could trigger widespread criticism throughout the hemisphere. Diplomatically, Washington would face a far more complicated environment than it did during many previous interventions. The reality is that nobody knows exactly how this crisis will develop. Military action remains only one possibility among many. Diplomatic negotiations could still reduce tensions. Economic pressure could continue without escalation. Or a limited military operation could occur if policymakers conclude that other options have failed. What seems clear is that Washington is unlikely to seek a prolonged conflict. The United States already faces multiple geopolitical challenges around the world. Another open-ended military commitment would carry significant risks. For that reason, any future strategy would likely prioritize speed, limited objectives, and political control. For now, Cuba remains at the center of a growing geopolitical storm. Military assets are in position. Political rhetoric is hardening. And speculation continues to spread. Whether this crisis ends with diplomacy, economic pressure, or military confrontation remains uncertain. But one thing is becoming increasingly clear. The Caribbean is once again emerging as one of the world's most important geopolitical battlegrounds.